My name's Nathan, I'm 27, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had a habit of brushing off anything I went through as if it were either an exaggeration or a personal flaw. I grew up hearing phrases like, stop being sensitive, or you're just trying to get attention, whenever I dared express pain, stress, or even excitement. It was like my feelings were invisible, and over time, I learned to keep quiet. But sometimes, no matter how much you've been conditioned to swallow your pain, your body forces the truth out. The moment that kicked everything into motion happened on a Saturday afternoon. We were at my aunt's house for a family gathering. The living room was crowded, laughter bouncing off the walls, the smell of food heavy in the air. I remember feeling a tightness in my chest that started small, like someone had rested a heavy hand on me, and then it grew sharper, spreading up toward my shoulder. I must have grimaced, because my mom immediately noticed, but instead of concern, she rolled her eyes. Nathan, stop being overdramatic, she said, her voice flat, dismissive. My cousin, sitting on the couch scrolling on her phone, didn't even look up before muttering. He's always looking for attention. He probably just wants everyone to fuss over him. The words stung more than the pain at first. I tried to brush it off, but then the tightness deepened, and I clutched my chest without even realizing it. A part of me wanted to ask for help, but another part, trained by years of being belittled, told me to stay quiet so I wouldn't give them more ammunition. So I sat there, silent, sweating, listening to my family joke about meaningless things while I felt my own body betray me. It wasn't until my aunt's neighbor, who happened to stop by with a dish, noticed me pale and hunched that anyone took me seriously. She gasped and asked if I was okay, which forced everyone else to actually look at me. By then, I could barely get out a word, my breath shallow. My mom groaned like I was embarrassing her and said, fine, if you're going to make a scene, let's just get this over with. Someone drive him to urgent care so we can all get back before dessert. The way she said it, like my pain was an inconvenience, lit a spark of anger in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. At the hospital, the nurses immediately wheeled me in, their urgency a stark contrast to my family's apathy. My mom and cousin followed, looking irritated, whispering about how I always blew things out of proportion. I lay there on the bed, monitors hooked to me, the beeping loud in the sterile room, and I kept replaying their words in my head. When the doctor walked in with the scan results, though, everything changed. He looked at me, then at them, and his face went pale. His tone was serious, clipped. That's when the room went silent. The doctor's face stayed pale as he explained what the scan revealed. I don't remember the exact medical terms because my head was spinning, but the gist was clear. This wasn't just some passing discomfort or stress. There had been a real issue with my heart, something that required immediate attention and careful monitoring. He wasn't theatrical about it, just matter of fact, but the weight in his voice made it impossible to ignore. For a moment, I thought my family might finally understand. That maybe this would be the turning point where they'd see me not as overdramatic Nathan, but as someone genuinely struggling. But instead of softening, they doubled down. My mom crossed her arms and said to the doctor, "You're probably just overcautious. Every time Nathan sneezes, he thinks he's dying." The doctor frowned, trying to remain professional, and repeated more firmly that this was serious. My cousin chimed in with a muttered, "Figures. He always finds a way to make everything about him." She scrolled on her phone again, like the whole situation bored her. I wanted to defend myself, to shout that I hadn't asked for any of this, that I'd actually tried to keep it quiet until it became unbearable. But the years of conditioning held me back. My words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was sit there, listening, as they spoke about me like I wasn't even in the room. What made it worse was the way they compared me to my cousin, Claire, the golden child of the family. She had always been praised for her ambition, her achievements, her charm. In their eyes, she could do no wrong. As I sat in the hospital bed, chest aching and wires hooked to me, my mom leaned toward her and said, loud enough for me to hear, "See, Claire? This is why I'm so proud of you. You never let little things hold you back. You're strong, not like." Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Claire smirked, flipping her hair back, and replied, "Yeah, I just don't give in to weakness." The words landed like a punch. I wasn't weak, I knew that deep down. I had built my own life without their support, worked jobs they never cared to ask about, kept myself afloat. But in their narrative, weakness was my permanent label, and they wore it like a badge to lift themselves higher. When the nurse came in to set up further tests, my mom sighed loudly, checking her watch. How long is this going to take? We've got family waiting back home. It's just so like him to ruin an entire day for everyone. I caught the nurse glance at her, then at me, her eyes full of pity. That pity cut even deeper because it highlighted what I had been denying. My own family didn't care whether I was okay. After the nurse left, my mom's tone shifted from irritation to guilt-tripping. She leaned closer and whispered, "Do you realize the stress you're putting on me? You've always been like this, taking all the attention, draining everyone. We're supposed to be celebrating, and here you are again." I clenched my fists under the blanket. The pain in my chest wasn't just physical anymore. It was layered with years of frustration and anger that I had swallowed down. I wanted to scream that I didn't choose this, that I didn't want their attention, that I just wanted a family who cared. But instead, I let the silence sit heavy between us. When my dad arrived later, he didn't ask how I was. He didn't even look at me first. He walked straight to Claire, hugged her, and said, "I'm glad you were here to help your mom handle this. You're always the responsible one." She smiled, basking in the praise, while I sat in the bed like furniture. Then he finally glanced at me and muttered, "Don't milk this too much, Nathan. Doctors love making things sound worse than they are." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about one incident. This was the story of my whole life condensed into a single hospital room, me fighting for breath, while they competed for who could dismiss me the most. The tension didn't ease after that. If anything, it grew heavier. Even as the medical team tried to help me, my family's disdain clung to me like a shadow, suffocating in its own way. And yet, as painful as it was, something inside me began to shift. A quiet ember of resolve started to burn. Their cruelty wasn't new, but the stakes were. This wasn't just about feelings anymore. It was about my health, my life, and I knew that if they could still treat me like this at my lowest point, then something had to change. That ember of resolve, though, hadn't turned into action yet. At that stage, I was still stuck in the room, tethered to wires, listening to the rising storm of dismissive comments, favoritism, and manipulation. And I knew, deep down, that the worst was still coming. The hospital kept me overnight for observation, and by the next morning, I was still hooked up to monitors, trying to keep calm while my chest throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The medical team checked on me regularly, treating me with a seriousness that my family refused to acknowledge. I thought maybe, just maybe, a full night to think about it would soften them. Maybe they'd come in with a little empathy. But if anything, the air felt heavier when my mom and cousin walked back into the room. My mom had that clipped, businesslike tone she used whenever she was about to make something all about herself. "Nathan, the doctors said it isn't immediately life-threatening, right? So that means you can handle a little responsibility while you're lying here. I don't want to hear any more dramatics." I blinked at her, confused. "What responsibility?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That's when she pulled out a folder of papers. Bills, insurance statements, and something I hadn't seen before, forms with my name on them. "I already told the nurse you'd be responsible for covering the extra costs," she said flatly. "You're an adult. You should be paying your own way. Claire doesn't need to be dragged into this." My cousin smirked, like she had won something. She added, "Yeah, Nathan, you've always leaned on everyone else. Maybe this will finally make you grow up." I felt my stomach drop. My mom had already told the hospital that I would take on the costs, without even asking me. It wasn't just about money, though I knew it wouldn't be cheap. It was the principle. At the exact moment when I should have been cared for, when they should have been stepping up as family, they had turned the situation into another opportunity to put me down and exploit me. I told her I hadn't agreed to anything, but she waved her hand dismissively. "It's already handled. Don't make a scene. Honestly, Nathan, you should be grateful Claire is even here helping me. You never do anything for this family." That was the breaking point. I had heard those words before in different forms my whole life, but hearing them while strapped to a hospital bed, while my chest still ached from the night before, made something inside me snap. The betrayal wasn't subtle anymore. It was written in ink, in the signatures they'd forged on my behalf. They hadn't just dismissed me this time. They had taken my vulnerability and twisted it into leverage. The betrayal didn't end there. Later that afternoon, while I dozed in and out, I overheard them in the hallway. My mom's voice was sharp but smug. This might be good for him. A reality check. He's always been weak, but if the bills pile up, maybe he'll finally toughen up. Claire laughed softly and said, or he'll just crawl back home and admit he can't handle it. Either way, we win. The words dug into me like shards of glass. I wasn't even sure which hurt more, the fact that they were so willing to sabotage me, or the fact that they did it with such casual cruelty, like it was a game. That was the moment I stopped hoping they'd change. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just keep swallowing the pain and waiting for validation that was never coming. I lay there, staring at the sterile ceiling, my chest heavy but my mind sharper than it had been in years. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was deliberate betrayal. And as I listened to their voices fading down the hall, I realized I had reached the emotional turning point. Something in me shifted. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, but it was there, a resolve that I wouldn't let this pass. That ember that had sparked before was now aflame, and though I didn't yet know how, I promised myself one thing. I would not let this betrayal go unanswered. The days that followed felt like a blur, but not the kind where time passes quickly. It was the kind where every second drags, heavy and suffocating, each one reminding me how utterly alone I really was. The hospital discharged me with a strict regimen, medication, follow-ups, and instructions to limit stress. Ironically, the moment I got back home, stress seemed to multiply tenfold. My mom barely spoke to me except to remind me about the bills she had dumped in my lap. The insurance form sat on the kitchen counter like a silent accusation. My cousin Claire paraded around, bragging about her new internship, while tossing little comments over her shoulder like, "Don't overdo it, Nathan. Wouldn't want you collapsing again." I retreated to my room most days, the walls closing in on me. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my heart would betray me again in my sleep. The ache in my chest was manageable with the medication, but the ache in my mind was something else entirely. I kept replaying the moment in the hospital when I overheard their words, that casual cruelty about winning. The more I thought about it, the more it hollowed me out. What cut deepest wasn't just their dismissal. It was the betrayal written in ink, the bills they forced onto me. I tried to call the hospital to dispute the charges, but they told me it was already processed. My mom's signature had been accepted as a guardian's note, even though I was an adult. She told us you couldn't make decisions clearly at the time, the billing rep said sympathetically. That nearly broke me. She had used my vulnerability as her excuse to tie me to debt. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand answers. But every time I tried to open my mouth at dinner, her cold stare silenced me. She'd say things like, "You should be grateful we were there at all. Do you know how embarrassing it was for us? Claire had to carry the family while you were lying in bed." It was a slow erosion, day by day. My friends stopped reaching out because I kept declining plans, too drained to pretend everything was fine. Work became harder, the stress made it impossible to focus, and I worried about losing my job. My health, both physical and mental, was spiraling. That was rock bottom, not just being dismissed, but realizing that the very people who should have been my support system were the ones pushing me down further. And yet, somewhere in that darkness, a seed of clarity began to grow. I started journaling late at night, scribbling down every slight, every betrayal, every cruel word. At first, it was just an outlet, but then the notes started to look like plans, ideas, small ways I could distance myself, regain control. I researched my rights, learned how forged medical documents could be challenged, and quietly reached out to an advocate I found through a local patient support group. I didn't tell my family. On the outside, I played the same role I always had, the quiet, weak one who let things roll off his back. But inside, something was shifting. I was still suffering, still dragging myself through each day with the weight of betrayal on my shoulders, but I wasn't just sitting in the darkness anymore. I was mapping the way out. The turning point hadn't arrived yet, but I could feel it looming. For now, though, I was at the bottom, broke, dismissed, aching in body and spirit. And that bottom gave me something I hadn't had before, nothing left to lose. The climb back up wasn't fast, and it wasn't glamorous. It was quiet, grueling, and at times, painfully lonely. But it was mine. I started with small victories. The first was finding a new doctor, someone outside the network my mom had shoved me into. This doctor listened. He treated me like a human being, not a nuisance. With his help, I got my medication stabilized, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like my body wasn't working against me. That stability gave me just enough strength to focus on the rest of my life. Work had been slipping through my fingers, but instead of letting it collapse, I doubled down. I pulled late nights when my chest allowed it, forced myself to push past the fog. Slowly, my performance improved. My boss noticed. Within 6 months, I had clawed my way not just back to baseline, but ahead. I was promoted to a position with more pay and more responsibility, a role that gave me the autonomy I had craved for years. That extra income became fuel. I didn't flaunt it at home. I kept it quiet. My mom and Claire still saw me as the weak one, the one barely holding it together. But while they whispered about me behind closed doors, I was opening new ones. I saved aggressively, researched investments, and built a financial cushion. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to feel safe, safe from them, safe from being cornered again. Emotionally, I built myself back up too. Therapy became a lifeline. Every session peeled back layers of guilt and shame that my family had piled on me for years. My therapist's words echoed in my head. You are not weak. You survived people who convinced you were. Those words became a mantra on the days I felt myself slipping. The more I stabilized, the clearer my thinking became. I revisited the notes I had scribbled during my lowest point, the ones that had started as venting but had grown into something more. Now, they weren't just pages of pain. They were a blueprint. I gathered every record from the hospital, every bill, every piece of correspondence. I saved screenshots of texts from my mom and Claire dismissing me, mocking me, belittling me. I didn't know yet how I'd use it all, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let their betrayal disappear into silence. Meanwhile, my relationship with them grew colder. At family dinners, I no longer tried to defend myself. I let them talk, let them sneer, let them write the same old story. They thought I was still the same Nathan, docile, dependent, desperate for their approval. In reality, I was becoming someone else entirely. Someone who didn't need them. Someone who was learning how to hold power in silence. Claire, the golden cousin, kept bragging about her career moves. She landed a job at a firm through family connections, and every conversation became about her bright future. My parents glowed with pride. I sat quietly, sipping water, hiding a small smile. Because while they praised her, they didn't realize I had been building something stronger, success earned, not handed. By the end of that year, I had my own apartment, far from their reach. A clean space, mine alone, without the constant hum of criticism. Moving out wasn't just about distance, it was about reclaiming my life. And as I shut the door behind me on that first night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. But the rise wasn't just about money or independence. It was about clarity. I finally understood that their treatment of me wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their need to control and belittle. And now that I was no longer under their roof, no longer bound by their forged signatures and manipulations, I had something they never expected me to have: freedom. And with freedom came power. Power they didn't even know I had yet. It was almost eerie how life has a way of circling back, setting the stage for things you could never have planned. By the time I was steady in my own apartment, thriving at work, and quietly saving every extra dollar, I thought my family might finally fade into the background. But fate, or irony, had other plans. The setup for what would eventually become my turning point started with something deceptively small: a phone call. My cousin Claire called me one evening, her voice dripping with the kind of forced sweetness I recognized instantly. She never called me unless she wanted something. "Nathan," she said, stretching my name like it was uncomfortable in her mouth. "I heard you've been doing well. Got a promotion, right?" I hesitated. Word had gotten around faster than I'd hoped. I muttered a simple, "Yeah," keeping my tone neutral. She chuckled lightly and added, "Good for you. You must finally feel like a grown-up." I wanted to hang up right there, but then she said something that made me pause. "Listen, I've been having some trouble at work. Nothing major, but, office politics can be brutal. And since you're in a similar field, maybe you could help me? You know, put in a good word with your contacts." That's when it clicked. We weren't in the same field, not really, but there was overlap. Enough overlap that her shiny new job relied on some of the very clients my company had begun working with. Clients I now had direct access to through my promotion. My position gave me a quiet but powerful role. I wasn't at the top, but I was close enough to influence who got contracts, who got glowing recommendations, and who found doors suddenly closed. I didn't say anything in that moment. I just told her I was busy and would see what I could do. But when I hung up, my mind was racing. For the first time, I had leverage, real leverage. Over the next few weeks, I listened more carefully whenever family conversations turned to Claire. My mom bragged endlessly about her career, how she was climbing so fast, how she'd be a partner before 30. But then my dad let slip that Claire's firm had been struggling to land a few big clients, clients that just so happened to be on my company's radar. I started to connect the dots, and as I quietly gathered information, an opportunity presented itself. I was invited to sit in on strategy meetings with executives, not to make decisions outright, but to provide data and insights. And in those rooms, I realized just how much influence I really had. My reports shaped the direction of deals. My words, even if indirect, carried weight. At the same time, I discovered something else, something personal. While organizing old papers for my own records, I stumbled across copies of the hospital bills. Buried in the paperwork was a detail I hadn't noticed before. My mom had used not just my name, but my social security number to process the charges. It wasn't just forging a signature, it was identity misuse. That revelation hit me like ice water. Suddenly, the pieces clicked together. I had financial stability, growing influence at work, and now, documented proof of what my family had done to me. Proof that could shatter their carefully maintained image if I chose to use it. The knowledge burned in my pocket like a secret weapon. I didn't wield it yet, but I kept it close, adding it to the growing file of evidence I'd been collecting. And while my family continued to treat me as the invisible weakling, they had no idea I was sitting on power that could tilt the scales completely. It wasn't time yet, but I could feel the storm building. For years, they had dismissed, belittled, and betrayed me. Now, without even realizing it, they had handed me the tools I needed to turn the narrative upside down. And I was patient. I let them talk, let them brag, let them underestimate me. Because the longer they believed I was harmless, the more devastating the fallout would be when the truth finally came crashing down. When the moment finally arrived, it wasn't dramatic at first. It was quiet, almost mundane, like flicking the first domino in a long line. But I had been waiting for it, setting it up piece by piece. It began at work. My company was in the middle of reviewing proposals for a massive contract, one that Claire's firm desperately wanted. I knew this because my mom wouldn't stop bragging about it during family dinners, repeating word for word the speeches Claire had given her about how this deal would seal her future. I kept my face neutral, sipping my drink while my mind turned. What they didn't know was that I was on the analysis team for that very project. My reports, while not the final say, shaped how the decision-makers viewed each proposal. When I reviewed Claire's firm's bid, it wasn't hard to see the weaknesses. They were flashy, but their numbers didn't add up. Normally, I might have let it slide with a neutral note. But this time, I was meticulous. I highlighted every inconsistency, every risk, every detail that could undermine their pitch. Not in a way that made me look biased, just clear, factual, undeniable. When the final meeting came, the executives leaned heavily on my analysis. Claire's firm was cut from consideration before the second round. The next week, I got a text from her. "Did you hear? We lost the bid. Everything was riding on that." "I don't get it. We had it in the bag." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back a short reply. "Tough break. Hope things get better." Calm, neutral, satisfying. But that was just the professional side. The deeper revenge came with the hospital paperwork. I had been quietly building a file of every document, every forged form, every dismissive text from my mom. With the help of a legal aid clinic, I drafted a formal complaint. Not against my family directly at first, but against the hospital for accepting a fraudulent signature and processing charges under my name without proper consent. The investigation that followed inevitably led back to the person who submitted the paperwork, my mom. I didn't tell her what was happening. I let the storm roll in on its own. The first hint she got was a letter in the mail, summoning her for a formal review. I'll never forget the look on her face at the dinner table when she read it. Her confident tone faltered for the first time in years. This must be a mistake," she muttered, her eyes darting nervously. Claire tried to brush it off, but even she couldn't hide the worry in her voice. Meanwhile, I had been quietly distancing myself, ensuring that none of their fallout touched me. My finances were separate, my apartment secure, my career steadily climbing. For once, I wasn't the vulnerable one scrambling to survive. I was the one pulling strings. The beauty of it all was that I never raised my voice, never had to confront them head on. Every move I made was calm, precise, backed by evidence and truth. They had spent years painting me as weak, overdramatic, incapable. But in the end, it was their arrogance, their dismissal, their betrayal that set the trap. All I had to do was let them walk into it. And as I watched them begin to unravel, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also clarity. Revenge wasn't about screaming at them or demanding apologies. It was about balance, about finally tilting the scales back after years of being crushed under their weight. Of course, the fallout hadn't fully landed yet. The letters, the professional failures, the cracks in their confidence, those were just the beginning. The real collapse was still coming. The unraveling came slowly, then all at once. The hospital's internal review uncovered exactly what I knew it would. My mother had submitted forms with my personal information without consent, signing my name and using my social security number to push through charges I had never authorized. When the report was finalized, it was forwarded to both the insurance company and the state's patient protection board. What might have been brushed off as just a family misunderstanding suddenly had real legal weight. My mom tried to spin it as a mistake. She called me late one night, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. "Nathan, you have to fix this. Tell them you gave me permission. You know I was just trying to help." I let the silence hang for a moment before replying. "Help? You saddled me with thousands in debt when I was in a hospital bed. You didn't help me. You buried me." Then I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt for hanging up. I felt free. The fallout spread from there. My cousin Claire's career, which had been her pride and my family's endless bragging point, started to crack. After losing the big contract, word circulated about her firm's unstable performance. Clients began pulling out, whispers spreading about their reliability. It didn't take long for her golden child glow to dim. When she came home for a family dinner, her tone was bitter, her usual smugness gone. "This is your fault." She snapped at me in the kitchen when no one else was listening. "You could have helped. You chose not to." I looked her in the eye, calm and steady. "You're right. I chose not to. Because helping you meant stepping back into the role you and Mom wrote for me. Weak, disposable, invisible. I'm done playing that part." Her face flushed red, but she didn't say another word. Meanwhile, the financial investigation into my mom's misuse of my identity left her with heavy fines and a permanent note on her record. The woman who had spent years parading her responsibility and sacrifice to anyone who would listen now had to explain why she was being audited, why her reputation was suddenly tarnished. And the most satisfying part? I didn't have to lift a finger once the ball started rolling. The truth did all the work. My dad, who had always been quick to praise Claire and dismiss me, grew quieter as everything unraveled. For once, he didn't have a lecture or a jab. He just sat at the table, staring at his plate, realizing the golden pedestal he'd built under Claire and my mom was collapsing. As for me, I kept moving forward. My career continued to grow, my health stabilized, and for the first time in years, I felt light. The weight of constantly trying to prove myself to them was gone. I didn't need their approval. I never had. The final confrontation came at what was supposed to be another family gathering. My mom tried to reclaim control, to play hostess like nothing had changed. But when she reached across the table and said, "Nathan, don't you think you owe us some gratitude after everything?" Something in me shifted once more. I set down my fork, looked her dead in the eye, and replied, "Gratitude? You nearly cost me my health, my finances, and my peace of mind. And when I needed you most, you mocked me. You don't get my gratitude. You don't even get my attention anymore." The table went silent. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line, my dad stared at his hands, and my mom, always so smug, so sure of her control, looked stunned for the first time in her life. I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked out. Not in anger, not in haste. Just steady, calm, and free. That was the last time I sat at their table. And as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't just been about watching them suffer consequences. It had been about reclaiming myself, my life, and my voice. The final line that echoed in my head as I walked away was simple, but it carried the weight of everything I had endured. They dismissed me as weak for years, but in the end, their downfall came not from my weakness, only from their own cruelty.